thanks for having me. It is, as you said, the subject is planning, planning for businesses in particular. And I think I'll just launch straight in if that's okay with you, because it's a fairly short time and I've wedged quite a lot into the presentation. So what I'll do is I'll try and share my screen. Hang on a second. How's that? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's perfect. We can see it. And maybe we've just put it in presentation mode and then we're ready to rock and roll.
I thought I had, hang on. Is that not in presentation mode on your screen?
No, but if you go into slideshow and then hit, I think, current slide. So if you, that's it. And then from beginning, it should then just go into.
Yeah, that's what I do, but it's come up on my other screen. Hang on a second. It's the old two screen.
Not the end of the world, because we can still see the big fat slide in the middle. So don't worry too much.
That is odd.
It happened recently with another speaker, actually, but it's fine. I mean, everyone can see it. Shout if you can't, but I think that's all fine.
Let me try something else.
Go for it.
How about
that? No, not on mine anyway. Tell me if I'm wrong. But I think that's fine. We promise not to look at the next slides.
Okay, no worries. Apologies for that. Okay, so business financial planning. This key word here is how to do it well. So well is the key word, because anybody can pull together a financial plan. Anybody can pull together a plan. You know, you can get a piece of paper and scribble a few numbers on it. 10 million pounds turnover, £1 million profit, and you can call it a plan. But the fact is, that's not a plan. And I've seen it done well, I've seen it done badly. So the idea here is to give you a few tips, a few pointers, and crucially, a kind of a framework or a way of thinking about pulling a plan together. It means it will be a good plan. And a good plan is important, as I'll briefly touch on why it's important and when you need to do it. But it's really important because it's not just a paper exercise. It's not just ticking the box. It will, if it's done well, it will give you a way to manage the business and a way to stay on top of things that you wouldn't normally have. So, as I said, I'll go into when and why to plan, but then I'll go into this framework, which if you take away only one thing from today, it's that, and it's that if you use it for the plan, you can also use it as a way of managing your business. So it's a way of thinking more than anything else. I think, as LJ said, any questions, stick them in the chat or let me know, and I can deal with them as we go. Otherwise, I will rattle through quite quickly because there's quite a lot of content in here. So when and why to plan. When is a plan needed? On the left of this slide here in red, you'll see what I call triggers. These are kind of the traditional points at which people think, I better pull together a plan, I better do it quickly. So the classic one is January. You know, I need a plan for the year ahead because it's January. I mean, it's just an arbitrary date, right? You need a plan at all times, not just because it's January. Perhaps because an investor is asking for it, particularly if you're a startup, or a bank is asking for it in order to approve an overdraft or a loan, or you want to sell your business or you're retiring. They're all external triggers to your business that come along and you think, I need a plan and I need it quickly. And the fact is, that's the worst time to put together a plan, because you're over a barrel already. You're doing it quickly. You're doing it for someone else. You're not doing it for yourself. On the right-hand side here in green, what I call the business stages or the business phases, when it is useful to have a plan. And spoiler alert, if you look down the list, you'll find there's a stage of the business that happens at any point. So the answer to this question is you always need a plan. And the beauty of having a plan that's always on tap is that when those triggers happen on the left, you've already got it. You may need to tweak it a bit, make it relevant for that audience, but you've got the nuts and bolts of it ready. You know you can trust it because it's big. You've been iterating it and updating it as you go, so you know it's accurate. And you can just keep rolling it out whenever you need it, and it's consistent, and it's you understand it from the bottom up, which gives you credibility. And you don't have to go through this horrible process of starting from scratch every time. So I won't go through everything on the right, but suffice to say, at every stage of your business, right from when you set it up to when you're thinking of exiting, to when things are growing or shrinking or circumstances are changing or there's a pandemic, that is the right time to have a plan. And why do you need to have a plan? Why do I say it's so important? Well, there are millions of benefits to a plan. I've listed 8 here. And if you think about it, if you're in a position of starting a business, pretty much every point on this list is a relevant benefit to that stage of a business. The first one, which is one of my favorites, often overlooked, even before you've got to the point of having the plan in place, the actual process of planning itself is a benefit, right? Once you launch a business, once you're into it and the day-to-day and you're rushed off your feet, it's very difficult to find the time to just stop and take stock and to really try and understand what's going on. And a plan gives you that opportunity. So whenever you're putting together a plan, it pays to do it properly, right? To set the time aside, to get all the data that you can get from any possible source, get it all on the table, and just make sure that you understand how your business is working, what the external environment's like, where you're heading, where you've been. And it gives you that chance to take a step back and really understand it, because you will think you understand your business, right? You think it's simple, but the longer it goes on, the more complex it becomes and the harder it becomes to stay across it. And a plan gives you that chance to reset. Help you find opportunities because you're looking at all this data. It helps you to take decisions. I mean, as a business owner, you do need a fair amount, rely on your instinct a fair amount, and that's the right thing to do, but it always needs to be a fact-based decision. Right? You always base it in fact or data, because sooner or later, if you're only going on instinct, you're going to come unstuck at some point. Communicate, this goes back to the investors piece. So internal and external, if you've got a plan, it shows where you want to get, it shows what your vision is, it shows what success means for you, and it shows how you're going to get there. You can use that for investors, for other stakeholders, maybe for hiring people. You want to make sure you recruit the right people. You can share with them what your plan is. I'm not saying you share it in the greatest detail that you have, all your confidential stuff, but you've got something that you can summarize and you can send out just the key bits to people and they can buy into your vision. Helps you get moving. I mean, the rabbit in headlights thing is a very real phenomenon once you're starting out. You could go in any direction. It's a bit like driving into a car park when there's no cars in it. There's so many spaces you can't choose on, right? And it's the same when you're starting out. So at least if you've got a plan, it gets you moving. It doesn't matter if it's 180 degrees in the wrong direction because you can change, but it gets you on that front foot and it gets you started. You can stay on the front foot by measuring your plan and tweaking it as you go. You can use it to get funding. And crucially, over these last 18 months, you can use it to survive. So a plan should always be couched in cash flow, and making sure you've always got enough cash at any point in the future. So there's no pinch points is absolutely crucial. Please let me know if I'm going too fast or if I have any questions, but I will just plow on. So that is a plan. It is important and it's always needed. But how do you do it and how do you do it well? Just before I get into that, there's a little sort of terminology piece I want to touch on, and that's the difference between a forecast and a plan. And the reason this is important is because they are two very different things, and you do need to consider both of them, particularly in this technique I'm about to show you. So a forecast is passive in nature. So it is what will happen based on the current circumstances. If I do nothing, what does the future look like? It's like a weather forecast, right? It's you're not influencing in any way. It's just what does the future look like. A plan, by contrast, is an active document, an active exercise, whereby you influence the future to reach the goal that you want to reach. So it's what can I make happen? And as you'll see as I go on, you need to embrace both of these things into a holistic picture, because you want to know what the future holds if you did nothing, and you want to know how you're going to change that, because that gives you that flexibility and it gives you that control that you need for your business. These terms are often used interchangeably. When I'm kind of doing my own marketing and talking to people, I'm guilty, as many people, of saying forecast when I mean plan or even budget, and a lot of people do to me. But the concepts themselves are the most important. So if you keep those in mind for the rest of this presentation, it'll help you to get your head around what I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about now is effectively what I call the baseline plus approach to planning, also known as thinking in layers. And it's a way of thinking, a way of managing your business that breaks everything down into its component parts and it helps you both to understand what's going on, but also to manage each of those components carefully to reach where you need to get to. So starting at the bottom here and working upwards, the forecast that I talked about, the passive piece, is at the bottom. This is what I call the baseline. And I'll go through all of these in detail over the coming slides, but this is your foundation of your business. This is what happens to your sales, your costs, your financials, but also your kind of ins and outs and your operational metrics as a piece of momentum. With you doing nothing, this is what the future looks like. And then on top of that, obviously, you add your initiatives. You have one layer per initiative. So you have many initiatives in different areas. You have initiatives in sales, initiatives in some of your bigger cost lines, initiatives in people, productivity, IT, whatever it may be. But they're specific. They're not necessarily numbers based, but they always lead back to numbers. And they are built on top of the forecast baseline in order to get you to your plan. So your forecast baseline plus each of your initiatives equals your plan. At the heart of what I'm talking about, that is the model, right? So a lot of people at this point ask me, where on earth do I start to put a plan together? You know, what is the first step? The first step is to start at the forecast. And we'll talk about that on the next slide, but start at the bottom and work your way up. What does the future look like? And then start to add on initiatives. Start with sales, because everything flows off sales. So start with your sales and your demand, work out what is possible and work out what the kind of reasonable timelines are for achieving those targets. Becomes your sales, move on to costs. Don't at this point kind of wedge your costs into what the sales target, but put what your actual costs are. And then at the end, you need to flex, obviously, to match your costs with the sales and make sure the whole thing hangs together. But crucially, start at the bottom and work your way up. So the baseline, how do you find your baseline? One thing to say just before I get into this slide, because the first point here, look at your history in detail. This is obviously aimed at a slightly more established business than a startup. It could be a scale up. It's something with at least 6 months of history, preferably more. But this approach works equally well with a business with no history. And I'll talk about that at the end as well. But what you need to do as a place to start is use your history, because you need to base this in fact, you need to base it in data. And the thing that you have that is rock solid is actual financial history, maybe even non-financial history. So you've got volumes and prices and whatever it may be. Use your history in as much detail as you can get. So you need to go down to the lowest level of detail, whether that's by customer, by product, by channel, by geography, whatever it may be. Take it down to the lowest level. Same with your costs, down to as low a level as you can get. It may sound like a kind of a lot of work, but it's rewarding, trust me. And then you need to break that down into layers. So this is that whole layers, thinking in layers approach. This is peeling the onion, if you want a metaphor, hopefully will stick in your mind. So you need to peel away those outer layers until you get to the heart of the history, which is the underlying trend that's going to continue in the future. So some examples of the layers you might find, there's going to be errors in there. As accurate as you can be, there will be errors. So you need to strip those out and clean them at source so they don't happen again. There's going to be one-offs, which is fine. That's not a problem. They are genuine. There's going to be one-off sales. There's going to be one-off dips in sales, one-off costs, whatever it may be. But it's important to identify them, understand why they happen, so you know if they're going to happen again and they're not genuine one-offs. And you strip those out. And then you adjust for where circumstances might be different to they were in your history. And what I'm talking about here is things like where maybe you've launched a new product during the course of last year. So you didn't have a full year in the history, but you do now, or you ceased a product or service, or you changed supplier, something that a circumstance changed during the point of the history such that the projection based on that history needs to be tweaked slightly. Because remember, this is based on current circumstances. This is not inclusive of any initiatives or objectives that you're putting into the plan at this point. And once you've stripped those out, you've got your underlying trend. So you've got then a set of numbers that you can safely assume is going to continue over the forecast period, whatever that may be, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the horizon. So you forecast that out based on a kind of flat rate or a slight growth, whatever you feel is appropriate, and then you lay back on top any new one-offs, any new circumstances. You don't put the errors back in, obviously, but you lay the other layers back on top, so you've got a robust forecast as the foundation for your plan. And you do this, as I said previously, you do this both for revenue and for costs. It's quite a big exercise if done well, but you only need to do it once if you're going to do it properly, because then you can keep it live after that. And every time you put a layer back in, make sure you have specific assumptions for it. And I'm thinking here of things like inflation. So add in a layer for wage inflation, add in a layer for general price inflation, or whatever it may be by cost line, but be very specific about what you're putting in so that you can change it. You can tweak those assumptions as you go, and you can stress test it and see if inflation were to shoot up to, say, 7 or 8% instead of the 2 that I had anticipated. Am I still a viable business, or what do I need to do to counter that? Same with price increases, maybe new launches. Just make sure that every time you layer a layer back onto the onion, be very specific about what you're talking about there and what you're including, because it will help you, but it will also help anyone else who's looking at your plan. And I'm thinking of investors here, lenders, whatever it may be. They want to see a plan. They want to know what assumptions you've applied to it, and they will want to stress test it themselves. So the easier you can make it for someone else, the better it is, the more chance you've got of success, and the more credible you seem as well as a business owner. So split it out, rebuild it, and keep it specific, which is going to be a common theme of this talk. And now I have a couple of tips, hints, tips, hacks, whatever you want to call it, for the baseline in particular. The first one is separation, right? So at the risk of flogging a dead horse here, it really is an important point. So remember that the forecast is things that happen, and the plan is things that you make happen. And the things that you make happen are your initiatives that go on top of the baseline forecast. So even if one of your initiatives is, let's say, for example, you've built your forecast and it's got inflation in it at 3%, and you say, well, I'm going to offset that inflation such that my costs are flat. That's fair enough as an initiative. You're going to need to think of ways to do it. It's not enough just to say, I'm going to offset it. You need to know how you're going to do it. And that's where the magic of an initiative comes in. But if you do that, don't just strip out inflation from your model altogether, right? Keep everything separate to an insane degree. So keep everything as separate as you can. So keep the inflation in there, because you can then change the assumption on that at a later date. And then have an initiative that says, I'm going to save costs by changing supplier, for example. And that's going to save me 3%. And then the net impact of that is that you've got no inflation. But always have them separate, because the inflation is not going to come out as you expect, because it's a plan. It's always going to be wrong on some level. And your initiative is not going to come out as you expect. And maybe your initiative needs to be bigger if your inflation is bigger, and vice versa. But the more separation you can maintain, the more flexibility you've got, and the better you can review your performance. You can work out at the end of the year, my cost did go up. Was that because inflation was higher than I thought? Was it because my new supplier was not as cost efficient as I thought? Or was it for something else? It gives you that ability to track your performance and to track your success, and then to tweak it and improve it continuously for the year after. Keep everything separate. And secondly, and this is a very important point and a surprisingly common mistake that I come across. I said that the baseline, the forecast, is your do nothing scenario, right? So this is what happens if you were to sit back on a beach earning 20%. This is nothing. The mistake that everybody makes is to assume that that's flat. The chart on the right, the middle line there, just flat. So if I do nothing, my sales will stay at 500,000. That's not true, right? If you do nothing, your sales are going to fall, because there's always a natural churn of customers. There's always some attrition there. You need to run to stand still effectively in business. So you need to be replacing customers just to maintain sales at a constant level. And if you don't reflect that in your baseline, then some of the initiatives you put in become very difficult to justify, because you are going to need to spend on marketing, and you are going to need to spend on other initiatives, new product launches, whatever it may be, to maintain your sales, right? But if you've already got your sales flat in your forecast, you're going to put an initiative in, a marketing initiative, and you're going to, and it's on the face of it, it will look like you get no benefit for that spend because your sales are already flat. But your forecast should show sales coming off. Your initiative should show filling that gap to flat, and then you have further initiatives to then drive sales growth. But it's a very important starting point to show that reduction. And the reverse, of course, is true with costs. If you do nothing with costs, they're going to increase because of inflation and because of scope creep and just other kind of inefficiencies that creep into processes and creep into supplier agreements. So you need to stay on top of costs as well. So you can't assume in your baseline scenario that costs will be flat. They won't be. They will increase, even if it's by 1-2%. You know, it compounds and it makes a big difference. So reflect that in the baseline. Reflect the fact that costs go up, sales go down, and then reflect an initiative to reduce costs or an initiative to increase sales. But keep in mind that your baseline is going to be, if not ugly, then it's going to be not where you want it to be, right? Because if it did, then you wouldn't be needed. Your business would run itself. But the baseline is going to be a fairly messy picture. But on top of that, you're going to be laying your initiatives to make it look where you want it to be and to make it a viable business. So actions to offset these impacts are initiatives. So how do you find initiatives or objectives to build this plan and to make it a viable business? Well, the first obvious one to go to, as I just said there, is to offset those negative layers in the baseline. So your sales are coming off because you're going to lose customers. Initiatives, how can you retain customers slightly more? I might invest in a sales team. I might invest in customer feedback and address some of that. I might invest in slightly kind of a subscription model or something else that's going to retain customers. The other negative layers I've got are increasing costs. So how am I going to address that? Maybe I'm going to look for some new suppliers. Maybe I'm going to change materials. Maybe I'm going to try and increase volume to get a slightly better unit cost. Whatever it may be, your first point of call is to look at what is dragging down your forecast and try and offset it with an initiative, a specific initiative. Again, it's not enough just to say, I'm going to offset a cost increase. You need to know how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and who's going to be responsible for it. Secondly, because you've gone into all this detail and because you've got your history or your current trading performance, you have a huge asset in the form of sales data by customer, by product, by channel, by geography, even by sort of time of day, day of the week, whatever it may be. Just crunch that data as much as you can in every which way until you find some trends. There will be a trend in there somewhere. It's just a question of finding it. But it's about analyzing it 100 different ways to find that 1%, that one way out of 100 that is meaningful and gives you that sudden realization that I'm selling really well this product in this market and it's growing exponentially, and I need to have an initiative to really capitalize on that and to share that performance across the rest of the products or across the rest of the country, whatever it may be. So use that data wisely. Don't worry if you have to throw away a load of analysis just to get to the right one. That's you know, it's panning for gold, really. You need to keep going until you find that eureka moment. You think that's an opportunity I'm going to go after. And then from that stage, you've got your kind of sales goal. You know that there's a real opportunity here to go after, and then you can turn that into real actions to deliver that. And that becomes probably more than one, probably several initiatives in your plan on sales alone. And then you've got what's termed the cappuccino effect. And this is in effect, in the days in the good old days when I was still able to commute anywhere rather than just bedroom to office, I'd buy a coffee every day and not think twice about it. But obviously, if you do that and you add up the cost of that over the course of a year, you've spent, I don't know, £1,500 on coffee. But it creeps up in you because it's very small, repeating, almost habitual spend that you hardly notice. And that's the cappuccino effect. That's the metaphor here. And every business has its cappuccinos, right? It has its long tail of spend, whereby it goes out of the door many times a day, maybe. Stationery is a classic, whatever it may be. You spend a lot of money, but in short amounts over frequent intervals, and you never see it. So when you're looking, especially a few years down the line, where you've built up a bit of complexity in the business, when you're looking at this data again, focus specifically on the long tail of costs. Get into it, look at what you classify it properly in the first instance so that you can add it all up and you can see what you've spent in that period, and just allow yourself to be shocked by that and think, I did not realize I was spending that much on pens, or I didn't realize I was spending that much on taxes, or whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be. I gave this example the other day and somebody put their hand up in the chat and said, I've already taken this on board because I've stopped having coffee since the pandemic started. It's not specifically about coffee, it's a metaphor, but good for you. So it doesn't have to be coffee. It can be any spend, as long as it's small and it's something you would have overlooked previously. Just get into the detail, have a look at it. Maybe you do need to spend it, maybe you need to spend less, maybe you don't need to be spending it at all. Whatever it is, be honest with yourself and have a look at it. And then flip that on its head for other initiatives. So whilst the long tail is a drag on your business for cost, it is an opportunity for revenue. So can you create those small incremental revenue amounts that people are willing to pay for, giving value? Obviously, I'm not talking about, trying to sell something for nothing, sell nothing for something, but can you position something, small upsells or whatever it may be, that helps you to drive your top line and helps you to retain customers and retain that sales gap that would otherwise emerge, such that people don't mind paying it, they know they're getting value, and they do it without even thinking. So it's kind of recurring revenue for you. Can you identify initiatives that way? It's about sort of systemizing your thinking around this little and often approach, both on costs and revenues. So what makes a good initiative? I've touched on this a couple of times already because it is that important, and you would be surprised how many times I come across established businesses, businesses with kind of on the face of it sophisticated finance teams, who would have an initiative like this one at the top here, which is we're going to grow sales by 10% in 2022. Like, that is not a good initiative. That's an aim, it's a target, it's a hope. If that's all you've got, it's very unlikely. Unless you're very lucky, I don't think that's going to happen. A good initiative is specific, and it has somebody accountable for it, and it has a timeline, and it has a value on it. So some examples there. Growing sales obviously is a valid and a crucial metric to have, but you need to know how you're going to do it. So I'm going to launch X in April. I'm going to start a Google ad campaign in March, or I'm going to take part in a business expo in June. Crucially, it's something very specific. There's a specific action there. There's a time, there's a date on it, and you need to give it to a person as well, whether that be you because you're in startup mode and you're the only person, or whether it's a slightly larger business and you've got a couple of people. It needs to be owned by somebody, because something that's owned by everyone is owned by nobody, as I say. And it's never more true than this, right? Somebody needs to be accountable. They need to know what they're doing and when, and they need to then report back on what went well and what didn't go so well, so that you can assess it and go again for next year. So it needs to be specific, and it needs to add up to the result that you need. So it may well be that you want to grow sales by 10% next year. That's fine. So have a list of initiatives, specific initiatives that add up to that number. So if you were to launch your product, do your Google campaign, and do your business expo, and all three of those added up to £1 million of sales, which is kind of 10% of what you needed, of what you're currently selling, then that's it. That's what you need. Have those as initiatives, all three of them, have owners with them, and then almost don't worry about the numbers. They're secondary to this, so that if those initiatives are delivered by that time, according to the kind of spec that you assume, the numbers will follow. Right? That's the assumption to all of this. So it's all very well to have the numbers. You have to worry about the numbers, but when you're talking about initiatives, you need to think beyond the numbers. There need to be real, tangible actions, real, tangible outcomes that will then drive the number, almost behind the scenes, that will drive the number that you first thought of in the plan. And by doing that, it makes it more real. So it makes it, the person who's responsible for this might not be a numbers person, but they will understand, I need to do this by this date, and I need to sell. You could even have, I need to sell this many products or whatever it may be. Something that's an easy KPI for people to get their head around and to monitor how they're doing, such that you then can be clear on what's going well and what's not going well during the year. So a good initiative is specific, and a good initiative is consistent. Right? So specific and consistent. And what I mean by that is that you need, every initiative is going to have a cost to it, and it's going to drive a benefit. And you need to have both the cost and the benefit in your plan at all times. So going back to the original point I made about the baseline, and sales will decline if you do nothing. You may then have an initiative to do another marketing campaign starting in March, spending however much money with an agency to target this customer segment. And the aim of that is to close that sales gap, right? So you'll put that into your plan. You'll say, let's say it costs, £20,000, and I'm going to deliver £200,000 of sales as a result of this campaign. So there's a clear return on that investment. And just as an aside, as I said before, if you hadn't got that £200,000 gap in your baseline, you wouldn't have a return on this investment, right? Because you'd already have taken that benefit, and you've still got to put the cost in somewhere. So keep them consistent. You put the cost in and you put the benefit in. And by doing that, you can immediately you need to be able to draw a line between everything you spend within reason and all the benefits that spend deliver to your business. And starting with that in the plan is the best way to do it, because if it's in the plan, you can then track against it, and you can start to think in that style when you're managing the business as well. So you're measuring against assumptions you've already put in, return on investment assumptions, performance assumptions, and you're constantly thinking, well, I spent the 20,000, that is what it cost, but I only got 100,000 back on sales, which may be 50,000 gross profit, and so on. So was the return good enough? Why didn't it return as much as I thought? But if you haven't got them separate in the plan and identified, and you've lost one in the baseline somewhere, that makes it that much harder to do. But the reason consistency is even more important is because at some point you're going to get to the kind of iteration stage of the plan. So you're going to have your first draft, you're going to pull it all together, put all your sales in, put all your costs in, you're going to look at it, and it's going to be a bloodbath. You're going to look like you're hemorrhaging money every month, guaranteed, because you put too much cost in, and your sales are probably a bit prudent. That's normal, because then you need to go around again and say, do I really need this in? And my sales should be driven a bit more than that, and so on, until you get to the point that you're comfortable with. But during that process, what often happens is somebody will say, well, let's just take 50% out of marketing, and they won't take out the sales that go along with it. So that's at the end of the plan process. If you do this kind of traditional way of doing a plan, where you just take a knife to the cost without thinking of the impact on sales, you end up with one side of the business divorced from the other. So you've got a sales team tasked with growing sales 10% with these initiatives that you talked about, but you've taken out the funding for half the initiatives, so you've tied their hands. And your business then is going to suffer, because you can't afford to invest to drive the sales that you've got in your plan, and it no longer makes logical sense. that's a problem. I mean, that's a huge problem for your business, because you can't magic the money up from nowhere. So you're going to have to then make other savings elsewhere if you really do need to do that marketing campaign. And it becomes a bit of it's just a constant distraction from running the business. So if you put an initiative in, put the cost in, put the benefit in. If you take the cost out, take the sales out. If you take the sales out, take the cost out. If you increase the sales, have a look at your costs. Maybe you need to increase those as well. Be consistent. And crucially, the second point here, always be thinking, where am I spending money? What benefit am I getting from that spend? Because you should always be thinking in terms of investment rather than cost. Right? So if you can honestly say that every pound I spend, I get at least 2 or 3 benefits back from that, rather than just the basic thing that I'm paying for, if that makes sense. So it could be packaging materials, for instance. So I have to spend money on packaging because I'm a physical goods business, and I sell D2C, so I ship out directly to customers. So there's always going to be an element of a significant element of my sales that has to go on direct costs of packaging. I know that it's a kind of fact of life of my business, so I'm going to spend that money. But if you treat that as just, it's going to cost me X because that's the way it is, and no more, that's a cost. But if you think, how can I use that packaging to set my business apart? Can I make it, the most kind of sustainable or circular economy packaging out there? Or can I make it lighter? Can I make it really good advertising or unique? Maybe it costs you a little bit more, but you get something back. You get the packaging, but you also get, you're more memorable, or you're more appealing to people who really value the kind of the greener side of things, or you're able to save money on transport costs because the whole thing is lighter, or whatever it may be. But just, you need to be thinking in terms of, I have to spend this money, but I don't have to settle for just the bare minimum, right? It might be worth spending a little bit more or shopping around to get complementary benefits for everything I spend. Insurance, I think, is always a good example. Yeah, if you have to have insurance, it's just a grudge purchase because you need to have it. But there are insurance providers out there who have charitable links, or they have other benefits that they could give you that is more than just the insurance side of it. Same with accountants, which sounds like a shameless plug, but it's not. It's, if you have to spend money on an accountant, make sure you get one who's going to help you look forward with your plan, rather than just add up a load of numbers you already know and give them to you. It costs you pretty much the same, but you're getting more benefit from it. So make sure that your initiatives are consistent, and make sure that they are giving you the maximum they can give you every time you put one in on the cost side. Because if you lose that connection, you lose that direct link, then not only is it because business become harder to manage, but you lose a bit of that credibility as well when you're showing that plan to investors. So how many initiatives do you need? This is a common question that I get asked. And the kind of cop-out answer is, it depends. There's no real right or wrong answer to this, but there are a couple of helpful guidelines. So the key thing to know is what is your end point? And this image here probably doesn't come out too well. It's not in presentation mode, but on the left is effectively a kitchen table business, a lifestyle business that you don't want it to grow a huge amount. You want it to be able to support you, maybe a couple of people, your family, which is fine. That's just where you want it to get to. On the right hand side is world domination, completely other end of the scale. You want to expand quickly in your home market. You want to go international. You want to go sort of integrate vertically, or you want to expand into other products. Whatever it may be, you've just got so much faith in your product that you want everybody to have it, or you're just that ambitious that you want to take over the world. So there's no right or wrong goal here. And it's important to know where you sit, because that would determine how much you need to grow, and that would determine how many initiatives you need to include, particularly on your sales side. And you need to know by when. So timing, as always with a plan, is absolutely critical. So you can pull together a plan over 3, 5, 10 years, obviously it becomes much more of a finger in the air as you go out much more than 3 years, but it's still worth doing, just on less detail. But over that time, you need to know how quickly you want to grow, and how quickly you want to reach your endpoint, because it needs to be realistic, but it needs to be it needs to coincide with where you think your business is going to be. And crucially, if you do want to be growing quickly, just understand why you want to be doing it. Like, does it fit with the other aims of your business? Because growth in itself isn't a necessity. Growth isn't an objective on its own. It's to support your other objectives, and that may be servicing more customers, or changing something that you see as is wrong with the world, or whatever it may be. Why do you want to grow? Why do you need to grow? What does your product need to be reaching that many people by that point? And once you've got that, you can work backwards. You can work backwards to what the sales need to be 5 years out, 3 years out, 1 year out. You can do your baseline, you can work out what your gap is, and then you can start to identify initiatives. Depending on the value of those initiatives, you can work out how many you need in order to reach, or preferably slightly exceed, that target, on the basis that not all those initiatives are going to be successful. The only caveat to that is don't overdo it, right? Because you also need to be conscious of your constraints, your scarce resources. Cash is obviously the big one. So you can't fund everything in your plan cycle. And if you try to do that, you're gonna come unstuck. So you need to be honest with yourself about how much these things are going to cost, and how much cash you've got, and how much you can realistically raise from funding. But cash isn't your only scarce resource, right? Your own time is often overlooked. That is a scarce resource, as is the time of anyone else who's working there. Or it may be there's a constraint in your supplier capacity, or your factory production, or your kind of logistics distribution. Wherever the bottleneck may be, needs to be reflected in the number of objectives you put in. Because if you put too many in and you become distracted, you end up achieving none of them. But there's a famous stat about objectives within the workplace, which is, if you have 3, you're likely to achieve 3. If you have 10, you're likely to achieve only 1, and so on. So the more objectives you have past a certain point, you become actually less effective than having fewer but being more focused. So it's a bit of a non-answer, but it is a couple of warnings as to how you determine where to stop with these initiatives. So I would say know where you want to be and why. I would say include initiatives that get you to there and slightly beyond. And then I would say, once you've got that list, look at it carefully, both in terms of how much it's going to cost, but also how much physical time you and the team have to how you prioritize those initiatives, and then which year or which period they fit into. Don't throw them away, because it may be that what you can't do this year, you can do next year. So they're still good initiatives, but just be absolutely brutally honest with how much you can achieve by when, and put that into the plan. Because again, this is all about credibility with external funders or lenders, or whoever it may be, external stakeholders, because there's ambition, and there's just reckless financial planning, which just going to take away from the credibility of the business. And then once you've got that, so that's how many initiatives, but how on earth do you put a value on those initiatives, or what should the value be, or how ambitious should you be with those initiatives? And the reason I put this in, which is the final tip actually in this deck, is there's a common fallacy when people are pulling together a plan. And it goes either way. And usually it's people say to me, I tend to over-egg my costs, because then when I don't spend them all, then I look like a hero, and it takes the pressure off. And similarly, I underdo my sales, because then I can overshoot my targets, and I look like I've had a great year. And I think that's a good thing. Accuracy, forecast accuracy in particular, accuracy needs to be your ultimate goal in all of this process. So over forecasting, which can be a temptation when you're trying to get funding, is natural. So you're going to be ambitious, you're going to want to impress people, you're going to want to show that whoever's investing is going to get a 10 times return, without breaking a sweat. But really, is it realistic, particularly to the trained eye, to some of the experience of these things? Or are you going to lack a bit of credibility with that? Is it something you can actually achieve? Is it going to become obvious within 3 months that you've wildly overestimated? There are a lot of pitfalls to over forecasting, but under forecasting, which is the example I just talked about, where people think that's a good thing, is just as bad. Right? If you under forecast your sales and you go through this exercise to make sure you don't overspend, so your cash, you're still positive cash every month, then you're going to have to forecast less costs than you would ordinarily. And that means you're going to be able to put less initiatives in your plan because you can't afford them. Similarly, if you over-egg your costs everywhere else, you just inflate everything by 10% because then I'm going to be a genius at the end of the year when I've spent 10% less. It's the same problem. You're going to have no leftover money to spend on other initiatives, and so they're going to have to stay on the to do next year pile. And that is a terrible waste of resources. That is inefficiency baked into your business, because there are some opportunities there that probably would be, equally as good as the ones you've got in there, if not better, because you really can't tell the success of these things up front, that you're just not planning to do because you've tied up the resource you would use in a place that is never actually going to be spent. It's far better, to be honest with yourself, include costs as you fully expect them to be, take that risk, take that responsibility for delivering those costs, and then include as many initiatives as can be afforded, within a realistic sales forecast and a realistic cost forecast. By all means, include some headroom in that cost. I'm a big advocate of what I call a fighting fund, but a pot of money in there. So you've got all your initiatives, and let's say you've got, I don't know, £20,000 left over that you put in as a specific unallocated cost in the plan, because there will be things that come along, there'll be risks that come along, or there'll be other opportunities you haven't thought of that you want to go after in the year, and you don't want to be taking money away from other initiatives to spend on it. So have a ring-fenced amount that's called a fighting fund, by all means, but just make it specific and separate, the same tips as before. Don't just add on 10% to the other costs, because you're going to lose sight of it. Have the other costs as accurate as you can get, and then have another line that's unforeseen opportunities or unforeseen risks. And then once you spend some of that, take it out, work against that, and obviously when you get to next year, you can work out if that was enough, or if you need to sort of increase it or decrease it the year after. But as with all of these things, accuracy is the watchword. So don't be tempted to overdo it. Don't be tempted to underdo it. Aim for as accurate as you can get. Aim to continuously improve that accuracy. And this is the whole point behind having the layers separate, the assumptions separate, the initiatives separate, your cost and benefits linked. You always need to be reviewing what actually happened versus what you thought would happen. And you can then tweak those assumptions for that plan when you get to next year. You never have to start the plan again from scratch. This is about tweaking what you've got. So it's a kind of one-time pain to get all that data in and to set it up. But then every year you kind of refresh it with better data and better results that change your accuracy. So use those layers and then have this headroom in there that is specific. And if you keep those together, you keep your plan realistic, challenging but realistic, it will deliver for you in ways you can believe. It will. You won't need to redo it again. You won't need to look every month and think, I'm wildly off where I thought I was going to be. I'm materially different, such that the plan is not worth the paper it's written on. But that will happen if you're over or under confident when you're putting the plan together. So it is about accuracy, because all of your decisions need to be based on this data. And then your performance needs to be measured against the plan. And all of this kind of builds on itself and gives you that momentum. The first plan you pull together will be probably quite inaccurate, but it doesn't take long for you to build up that data and to start improving that accuracy. It's never going to be 100%, probably not even close, but even if it's, 60, 70%, it's such a powerful tool and a powerful way to manage your business. So with that in mind, just as a summary, you need a forecast and a plan, but you need that baseline initiatives, you need the final plan, and you need it at all times for yourself, for the business, not for anyone else. You need it to manage the business. If you can think in layers and keep everything separate, it will make your life so much easier. I promise you that. And if you're specific and consistent as well with your initiatives, thinking beyond the numbers, so translate everything into real actions such that the numbers will follow. Know where you want to get to and why and how long it will take. And that will help you then create this comprehensive set of initiatives, what I call a playbook, but it's your go-to place where you have all your initiatives, whether they're sales or costs, and you can pick and choose your kind of selection at any point, and you put them in or you chop them out, but never lose sight of them. Right? If they don't make it to the plan, keep them on the bench, as it were, keep them in reserve, because it's still a good idea. It's just probably not made your top 5 or top 10 at this stage. Go for accuracy, and bring it to life. So just measure against it. Get some KPIs set up that measure initiatives and your assumptions. Look at it constantly. Don't put it in the bottom drawer, because you will have to redo it every now and again. But just keep it live. Keep tracking against it. Tweak it. Do it once. Do it well, and keep it live. That's my advice. I appreciate. I rushed through it because it's now 5 to 2. So I appreciate. It may have been a little quick. I could talk about this stuff for hours, and I often do, but if there are any questions, please let me know either now, or you can contact me separately. I'm happy to help anyway. I'm happy to look at anybody's plan, to be honest. I just love planning. But I do passionately believe if you follow this process, this way of thinking, it will pay you back in spades.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was just jam-packed full of information. We need someone like you in our lives who loves planning. So just guys, if you have any questions, do you want to ask them now? If there was anything you didn't feel was covered, or just like you want clarification on, or just a comment, or any kind of top tips that you wanted to share with your peers, then that now is the time. We have 3 minutes.
Cool, perfect. Hi LJ, hi Ellen.
Hi.
Yeah, so I had very quick questions. Thanks for your presentation. It's really wonderful to attend this session. So we've been doing a lot of forecasting, planning for our potential investors, potential grant monies. And is it like a lot of people say that financial modeling, I can understand in valuation, there is a model comes, discounted valuation, all this comes. But for a projection, is there some fixed expectation year-wise, or 1 year growth, 2 year growth, revenues, or as well as expenditure? So is there any fixed model out there, or it is purely based on, as you suggested, how accurate you plan your expenditure and revenues?
Yeah, it really does depend on each business and each industry, to be honest. So there's no set thing that people look for. It is, particularly if you're talking to investors, it will depend on the amount of funding being kind of requested, and what return they'd look for, which can be, they do, if it's equity in particular, they do look for a sizable return. So that would push you to quite a lot of growth quite quickly, certainly within 5 years, because that's, people look for 10 times probably return or more, and the value of the business. So your turnover is going to have to grow, well, I mean, exponentially from the first year, obviously, because it starts out very small. But yeah, the model itself, it's important to keep the model. Any model you have is important to keep it flexible, because that sort of question you get from investors, you can then model, they need this back. That would mean sales need to be X by 2026, and therefore, what is that kind of in annual growth terms? Can I even do that? So yeah, it's a long-winded answer to say there's no set rules about that, but it probably will be higher than you think. Would be my word.
Cool. Thanks for your comment. Yeah.
Any other questions just before we wind up? I know that people have to move to the next session, but if there are any further questions, then shout out or shout in the chat. Otherwise, Ian, thank you so much. There will be an opportunity for you to book one-on-one sessions with Ian as well over the next few months. So if there's anything that comes up afterwards, do not worry, it is not the end. But in the meantime, Ian, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. It looks like people are very grateful in the chat, which is always good. And we shall speak soon. But yeah, go and have a massive ciabatta now for your lunch. You deserve it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Take care, Ian. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.